Everyone thinks they know the story of the king who lived forever. They call him a god. They call him a savior. But they don't know about Nyame. Nyame was there before the gold. He was there before the magic. And he is the only reason the king hasn't been burned at the stake. Years ago, the king was dying. It was a serious sickness. His condition clearly shows he won't make it from the sickbed. Nyame couldn't let his friend go. He was the one who sought out the old thing beneath the roots of the world. He brokered the deal. He thought he was saving a leader, but he ended up creating a void. In the beginning, Obasolan was just a man. He was a great leader, a warrior who loved his people, and Nyame was his shadow. They grew up together, hunted together, and fought together. But as the years passed, the king began to fear the one thing he couldn't conquer: death. He saw his hair turning gray and his strength fading, and he became desperate. Nyame, being the loyal servant, was the one who went looking for a cure. He traveled to the forbidden places and found an ancient power, something that promised the king would never close his eyes. They thought they were cheating death, but they were actually inviting a curse. The ritual worked, but it changed the king. He stopped being a man and became a hollow vessel that needed to be filled with the life force of others to stay alive. This is where the real story begins. Nyame realized he had created a monster, but he couldn't let the kingdom fall into chaos. So he built a lie. He became the voice of the king. He told the people that the king was fasting to protect them. He told them the king had become a god who could no longer walk among common men because his glory was too bright. While Nyame stood on the balcony speaking about blessings and peace, the king was hiding in the dark, hungry. Nyame's job was no longer to protect a man, but to manage a monster. He was the one who had to choose which people disappeared. He would walk through the streets, looking for a young girl with a bright smile or a strong man with a kind heart, and he would whisper to them that the king had chosen them for a high honor. He led them into the palace, and they never came out. Nyame didn't eat the bugs or the blood himself, but he was the one who set the table for the beast. Every night, he had to look in the mirror and realize that the peace of the kingdom was bought with the lives of the innocent. He was the architect of a beautiful paradise built on a pile of bones. He wasn't just a servant anymore. He was the only thing keeping the lie alive. He knew that if the people ever found out the truth, they wouldn't just kill the king, they would kill him too. He was trapped in a golden cage, serving a god that he himself had invented, waiting for the day the king's hunger finally turned toward him. As the years turned into decades, Nyame realized a terrifying truth. The king was no longer the man he once loved. The old thing from beneath the earth had completely taken over. But more importantly, Nyame noticed that the king's power was tied to the lie itself. The king stayed strong only because the people believed he was a god, and because Nyame was there to feed him. The weight of the secret became a physical burden. Nyame began to see the faces of the disappeared in his dreams. He realized that he wasn't just the king's shadow. He was the king's life support. If Nyame stopped speaking, the king would lose his glory. If Nyame stopped feeding him, the king would wither. But the king knew this too. He began to watch Nyame with cold, dark eyes. He didn't trust his servant anymore. He started to demand more, not just common people, but those closest to Nyame. The king wanted to see if Nyame was still loyal, or if the puppeteer was getting tired of the show. One night, Nyame stood in the secret chamber, looking at the creature that used to be his best friend. He realized that he was the only one who could end this nightmare, but he was also the one most afraid to do it. If he exposed the king, the kingdom would burn. If he killed the king, he would be killing a part of himself. Nyame began to look for a way out. He started searching for the same ancient power he had used years ago, but this time he wasn't looking for a cure for death. He was looking for a way to kill an immortal. He had to be careful because every wall in the palace had ears, and the king was always listening to the vibrations of the floor. Nyame was playing a deadly game of chess with a monster that knew his every move. The problem was no longer just about keeping a secret. It was a race. Nyame had to find a way to destroy the king before the king decided that Nyame's soul was the only one left to eat. Nyame knew he couldn't do this alone. He traveled in secret to a distant sorcerer, an old man who lived in a cave of white salt. He told him everything and begged for a way to end the king's life. But Nyame was too trusting. The sorcerer was an old ally of the king, and as soon as he left, a messenger was sent to the palace. The message was simple. Your shadow is looking for a blade to cut you. Inside the dark palace, the king sat in silence. He felt a coldness deeper than death. He didn't see a hero trying to save a kingdom. He saw a brother trying to murder him. While Nyame was off uncovering the secret, learning that the king's soul was anchored to an ancient, sun-bleached bone hidden beneath the throne, the king was preparing his revenge. Nyame chose his moment carefully. He waited for the sun to reach its highest point, when the king's dark power was at its thinnest. He entered the throne room with the secret weapon hidden in his robes. But the king was waiting for him. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was sitting right there, looking old and fragile in the light. The king didn't strike first. Instead, he spoke with a voice that sounded like breaking glass. He told Nyame about the years they had spent together. He spoke about the sacrifices they both made. I gave up my soul to save this land, the king whispered. And you were the one who helped me do it. Now you come to me as a thief in the day. The fight that followed wasn't just a battle of weapons. It was a battle of guilt. The king lashed out with shadows that burned like fire, but because it was daytime, his reach was short. Nyame, knowing the king's movements better than anyone, dodged the deadly strikes. He managed to wound the king, drawing not blood, but a black, oily smoke from the king's side. But Nyame couldn't finish it. The weight of their friendship held his hand back for just a second too long. The king used that moment to call upon the last of his strength, nearly crushing Nyame against the stone walls. Knowing he was outmatched, Nyame used his final trick, a flash of blinding light he had prepared for this very moment. While the king was blinded and screaming in pain, Nyame didn't stay to fight. He knew the king's weakness was the heart of the palace, but his own weakness was his heart for the king. He turned and fled, escaping into the bright sunlight of the city, becoming a fugitive in the kingdom he had spent his whole life building.
Nyame realized there was only one way to stop the nightmare. He had to destroy the lie. He stood in the center of the crowded marketplace, not as the polished servant in leopard skin, but as a man covered in dust and blood. He shouted the truth until his voice cracked. He told them about the chosen children who were actually meals. He told them the king was no god, but a parasite living under their floorboards. The reaction wasn't what Nyame expected. The people didn't hail him as a hero. They turned on him with a fury that shook the earth. To them, Nyame was the one who had looked them in the eye and lied for decades. He was the one who had taken their children's hands and led them to the slaughter. They didn't just want the king's head, they wanted Nyame's soul. As the city erupted into a riot, the palace gates groaned and burst open. The king, no longer caring about his divine image, stepped into the light. He was a towering shadow of rot and hunger. Enraged by Nyame's betrayal and the people's rebellion, the king stopped playing the role of a savior. He began to harvest the city at midnight, snatching people from the streets to fuel his dying strength. The kingdom became a living hell. In the chaos, Nyame had to run for his life, hiding in the very alleyways where he used to walk as a prince of power. He was an outcast to everyone. The people threw stones at him, and the king's shadow tendrils searched every corner to find his old friend and crush him. Nyame realized that clearing his name was impossible. The blood on his hands would never wash off. But he also knew that he was the only one who understood the king's patterns. He was the only one who knew how the king breathed and how he fought. Driven by a desperate need for a final redemption, Nyame stopped running. He realized he didn't need the people to love him. He just needed them to survive. He began to lead the angry mobs, not as their leader, but as a sacrificial lamb, guiding them toward the palace's hidden weaknesses while the king roared in the distance, calling Nyame's name into the wind. The final hunt had begun, a hunter who was once a king, and a prey who was finally finding his courage. Nyame knew the people wanted his head, but he also knew they were powerless against the monster he had helped create. Standing before the angry elders, he made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He told them that the king was tied to the earth by magic no mortal weapon could touch, and that he was the only one who held the key to destroying him. He bought his life with the only currency he had left, the secret to the king's death. Nyame sought out a second sorcerer, one who lived far beyond the borders of the king's reach. This man did not serve the throne. He gave Nyame a single, anointed wooden stake, carved from a tree that had never seen the sun and anointed by a sacred oil. "This will end his immortality," the sorcerer warned. "But the king will see you coming from miles away. You will have to get close enough to feel his breath." Nyame returned to the city and accepted his role as the bait. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only asked for the kingdom's strongest warriors to wait in the tall grass. He walked out into the open square, alone, calling out to the king. The air grew cold as the king appeared, a towering shadow of rage. To the king, Nyame was the ultimate prize, the friend who had turned traitor. The king did not hesitate. He moved with the speed of a predator, overpowering Nyame instantly. He pinned Nyame to the red earth, his dark claws digging into Nyame's chest. As the king began to drain the life force from Nyame's body, Nyame didn't fight back. He endured the agony, keeping the king's eyes fixed on him, making the monster feel he had finally won. It was the distraction the warriors needed. Seeing the king occupied with his feast, they launched their strike from the shadows. With the king pinned down by the warriors' spears, Nyame used the last ounce of his fading strength to drive the anointed stake into the king's hollow chest. With a final, earth-shaking roar, the immortal king turned to ash and wind. The curse was broken. The warriors and the villagers rushed forward. They expected to find a dead villain, but instead, they found a man who had given everything to fix his mistake. They looked at Nyame's drained, pale body and realized that he had stood in the path of the monster so they wouldn't have to. The anger in their hearts turned to a heavy silence. They didn't leave him in the dust. The very people who had thrown stones at him now carried him gently through the streets. A legendary warrior took him into his own home, tending to the small pulse that still flickered in Nyame's wrist. Nyame survived, but he was no longer the voice of the king. He was a new man, a man who had walked through the fire of his own sins and come out on the other side. For the first time in his life, Nyame was not a shadow, he was a hero. Nyame lived the rest of his days in the sunlight, but history has a way of repeating itself. The king was gone, but the old thing, beneath the roots of the world, did not die. It simply waited for a new man with a different kind of desperation. It waited for a new name, a new language, and a new master. Centuries later, the world would forget the name Nyame. They would forget the gilded dust of Orizu and the king who turned to ash. But the role of the shadow, the man who manages the monster and cleans up the blood, remained. Whenever a powerful man seeks to live forever, a servant will always be there to hold the curtain shut. In our time, we call him Renfield. But if you look closely into his eyes, you will see the same reflection of a man who once chose to save a king and ended up creating a god. The names change, and the hunger takes different forms, but the shadow is always there.